The Astronomer of Eternity, Omar Khayyam, and the Brotherhood Beneath the Sycamore, Part 1 of an Introduction to the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. In the sacred city of Nayshaper, beneath a sky vast enough to cradle 1,000 dreams, 3 young men once made a vow. Only one would change the course of time with verse, stars, and silence. Omar Khayyam, the astronomer-poet of Persia. In the twilight shadows of Nayshaper, where windswept dust whispered like the breath of forgotten prophets, the city stirred to the slow rhythm of centuries. Turquoise domes gleamed beneath a sky so vast it seemed to echo the musings of the heavens. In this sacred place of scholars and mystics, of merchants and beggars, a boy was born whose gaze would one day measure the stars. Omar, son of Ibrahim the tentmaker, first opened his eyes beneath coarse cloth stitched by his father's hand. A child of silken sand, born to a lineage of craftsmen who bent the bones of wind into shape. He was neither prince nor prophet, yet in his soul stirred the restless brilliance of both. From the moment he could walk, he walked alone. From the moment he could speak, his questions burned holes in his elder's peace. It was said that the old Imam Moafak, a man of gravity and rare kindness, sat daily beneath a sycamore in the madrasa courtyard, his beard white as dried milk and his voice a current of honey through stone. Boys came to him as moths to flame, eager to sip from the cup of tradition, but Omar drank differently. He did not sip, he devoured. And in that sacred garden of minds, under the gold-green light that filtered through ancient leaves, there were 2 others that sat beside him. One whose fate would entwine with his like twisted vine, and another whose soul curved toward darkness like a blade, long and hidden. "Tell me," said Hassan ben Saba one evening, his voice cool as shaded marble. "Is it not written that those who study beneath the Imam's gaze shall rise to fortune?" He stood with arms folded, leaning against a pillar carved with verses. The call to prayer had passed. The garden lay silent, save for the shivering of birds. Nizam, who was sharp-eyed and grave even as a youth, glanced toward Omar, who sat cross-legged upon the stone, scrawling equations in dust with a twig. "Fortune," said Omar without looking up, "is a star one chases and never touches. Better to chart its course than to try and catch it." Hassan smiled thinly. "Then chart this. If one of us does touch it, shall he not extend his hand to the others?" Nizam raised a brow. "A vow, then." "Between us 3? An oath," said Hassan. "If one rises, he lifts the others. No pretense, no privilege. Equal as brothers beneath the eye of fate." The twig paused in Omar's hand. He looked up now, dark eyes alive with something unreadable. "Be it so," he said, and they clasped hands upon it. 3 young men whose names would one day tremble through history like chords from a broken lute. Time passed. The earth turned. Dynasties shifted like desert sand under moonlight. War drums echoed from the west, where crusaders stirred like hornets. In Persia, the throne of Alp Arslan passed to Malik Shah, and beneath him rose Nizam, once a student beneath a sycamore, now vizier of the realm, steward of empires. His robes shimmered with power. His pen governed cities. His word raised mountains. One evening, beneath the heavy red sky of Ray, as the vizier reclined amid silken cushions, sipping from a goblet shaped like a tear, a messenger arrived bearing news. "There is a man at the gates," the servant said, bowing low. "He bears no title, no soldiers. He asks for no coin. He asks only for your presence." Nizam rose, curious. "Who?" The servant hesitated. "He says, Omar Khayyam." The vizier's heart shifted, ever so slightly, beneath his brocade. He stepped out into the dusk. There stood the man, not robed in silk, but in a simple scholar's cloak. His beard was flecked with gray, his gaze undimmed by time, still burned with stars. "Omar," said Nizam, stepping forward, "you look unchanged." "And you," said Omar, "look like a throne learned to walk." They embraced. There was laughter, There was silence, and there was remembrance, like incense curling through memory. "You come to claim your share," Nizam said, voice warm with welcome. "Shall I find you a palace? A command? A title?" But Omar shook his head. "Only a corner," he replied, "beneath the shadow of your fortune. A place where I might study, write, and pray for your long life." Nizam studied him. The weight of power hung around his shoulders. But in that moment he felt a pang of envy, for here stood a man who needed none of it. "So be it," the vizier said softly. 1,200 mithqals from the treasury of Nishapur, and freedom. Freedom to live as you will. Thus Omar returned to the city of his birth. No guards flanked his gates. No trumpet announced his name. But from within his humble courtyard, the quill of the astronomer moved with the speed of falling stars. He spoke with the heavens, and they answered. He questioned time itself, and it bowed to his curiosity. When Malik Shah sought to reform the calendar, it was Omar they summoned. 8 wise men sat in consultation, but it was Omar's calculations that bent the sun to new reckonings. The Jalali calendar was born, a measure so precise that even the Gregorian, centuries later, would struggle to rival it. In Merv, in Isfahan, in the silence of observatories and the din of court, his name began to echo. Not in politics, not in conquest, but in the whispered reverence of those who knew the beauty of numbers and the terror of infinite time. And still, he wrote, in the deep hours before dawn. His verses emerged, wry, melancholic, luminous, as wine poured onto stone. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. O thou who burns in heart for those who burn in hell, whose fires thyself shall feed in turn, how long be crying, mercy on them, God, why, who art thou to teach, and he to learn? If I myself upon a looser creed have loosely strung the jewel of good deed, let this one thing for my atonement plead, that one for two I never did misread. But far from him, in a fortress carved into the cliffs of Rudbar, another hand wrote differently. Hassan, disillusioned and hungry for power, had turned the vow into venom. At Alamat, he raised the red banner of the assassins, and beneath its shadow, a generation trembled. His followers drank hashish and awaited commands with vacant, fervent eyes. And when Nizam, the old friend, stood too long between Hassan and his ambitions, the dagger found its mark. Some of Omar's Rubaiyat warn us of the danger of greatness, the instability of fortune, and while advocating charity to all men, recommending us to be too intimate with none, when Nizam-ul-Mulk was in the agony of death, he said, "O God, I am passing away in the hand of the wind." Thus, the boyhood vow dissolved into blood. But in Nishapur, Omar gazed still at the stars. His quill moved, his wine cup brimmed. And in the stillness, he did not mourn with tears, but with verse. Part 2. Introduction to the Rubaiyat Omar Khayyam, the astronomer-poet of Persia. In the hushed twilight of Nishapur, where the sand moved like whispering memory and the stars gathered in quiet judgment overhead, the tomb of Omar Khayyam lay half-hidden beneath a quilt of rose petals. The wind moved softly through the orchard walls, coaxing the blossoms free from their boughs as if in reverence. No herald had marked his death with trumpets or lamenting verses sung in bazaars. The world continued, as it always does, indifferent and eternal. But those with eyes to see would find a hush had fallen on the stones of the street. And even the fruit vendors outside the city walls, loud in voice and barter, had been caught in odd moments of stillness since the old poet's soul had fled. Years before, in the shade of that same garden wall, he had sat with Khwaja Nizami of Samarkand, whose youth still drank hungrily of the elder's wisdom. My tomb shall be in a spot where the north wind may scatter roses over it, Omar had said, eyes trailing the slow arc of a hawk slicing through the air above them. Nizami had turned to look upon him, caught in the peculiar tone that always came when the philosopher was closest to prophecy or jest. "You speak as though you have chosen your resting place already." "Not chosen," Omar murmured, his fingers idly plucking a wild rose growing by the foot of the wall. "But known, as I have known other things before they came. The stars teach their lessons to those who wait long enough beneath them. And I have waited." That memory clung to Nizami like incense years later, when, returning from long travels, he wandered to the edge of the orchard to find the very vision made true. The wall remained, half crumbling but steady. From its crown, the gnarled arms of an aged peach tree reached down, and at its base, where the stone had gone gray with time, lay a grave strewn in blossoms. Not planted, not arranged, simply fallen, as though the heavens themselves had wept flowers. His throat tightened as he knelt beside the stone, the smell of ripe fruit and earth all around, and felt the presence of the man once more. No inscription graced the slab, no name. But in that emptiness lay truth, as Omar would have preferred it. Nothing fixed, everything falling. Omar was not unknown to the world of men, though few dared name him aloud. The Sultan Malik Shah had favored him, yes, had bid him reform the calendar, had tasked him with measuring the slow pulse of heaven itself. Yet even in the Sultan's court, where gold dripped from every utterance and the peacock-feathered shadows of concubines rippled behind scented screens, Omar remained aloof. When the vizier Nizamul-Mulk, once his schoolmate, offered him place and title, Omar had refused. "The greatest gift you can confer on me," he had said, voice calm amid the tapestry of courtly intrigue, "is to let me live in a corner under the shadow of your fortune, to spread wide the advantages of science and pray for your long life and prosperity." And so it was, a pension secured but no power sought. Where Hassan ibn Sabah, that fire-eyed child of dogma turned dagger lord, had grasped at authority and buried himself in blood, Omar chose stillness. He turned not toward war or worship, but toward the stars and toward the cup. He who had once stitched tents in the markets of Nishapur, the young craftsman beneath the name Khayyam, wove instead now a canopy of verse, not to shield from rain, but from the endless thirst of human questioning. His fingers stitched Rubaiyat quatrains delicate and dangerous, that bled from parchment with the same bitter clarity as wine poured from a cracked jug. "Come, fill the cup, and in the fire of spring, the winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to flutter, and the bird is on the wing." They called him godless, a heretic, a mocker of sacred things. And yet, in their secret gatherings, even the Sufi poets, those mystics who pretended disdain, recited his verses beneath their breath. For while the Persian poet Hafiz clothed the soul in veils of metaphor, Omar had stripped it bare. Where others floated between heaven and earth, Omar stood planted. Not from lack of wings, but from refusal to fly toward illusions. He questioned what others dared not name. And that inverted bowl we call the sky, where under crawling cooped we live and die. Lift not thy hands to it for help, for it rolls impotently on, as thou or I. He did not rage, nor did he kneel. Instead, he drank deeply, not only of wine, but of the moment. Every breath, a prayer to the present. Every silence, a temple. And yet he was no cold philosopher, not merely a machine of numbers and nihilism. There was heat in his laughter, affection in his gaze. Children adored him, drawn to the quiet glimmer in his eyes and the way he turned stars into stories. Lovers lingered near him, unnerved by his clarity, yet drawn to his warmth. He loved, though he called nothing eternal. He mourned, though he trusted no paradise. He was alone, often, but he was never lonely, even when the whispers grew loud, when the Sufi sheikhs condemned his verses from the minbars, when students warned each other of the old man, with questions like scimitars, he remained unmoved. It was said he once stood outside the great mosque during the Friday sermon, scribbling equations in the dust as the imam thundered about divine judgment. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "Calculating the number of stars that will go on shining after we've all gone silent." Toward the end, his beard had turned white, and the lines around his eyes deepened like the folds of an ancient scroll. But his gaze never dimmed, nor did his spirit. And so when he passed, it was not in thunder or agony. The world did not tilt. A servant found him in his study, head resting on folded arms, a half-finished verse by his side, and a cup, still warm, beside his hand. The stars overhead did not mourn. They merely shone, and the next morning the wind came in from the north. It rustled the orchard, it shook the trees, and it dropped 1,000 roses on his tomb. Part 3 of an introduction to the Rubaiyat. Yes. So came the final reckoning, where scholar and poet, translator and mystic knelt in the dust of centuries and debated what essence Omar Khayyam had truly poured into his chalice. It was no simple dusk that settled over that dialogue, but a dusk weighed with incense smoke and the faded brilliance of ancient stars. Stars Omar himself had mapped when they wheeled overhead in the vault of Persian skies, unheeding of his brief spark of thought beneath them. In the hush of the study, where manuscripts breathed dust and memory, the final words of a long-considered judgment began to form. "Wine," said the translator slowly, "was wine." The room was dim, the candle burning low, throwing long shadows over the littered leaves of translation and commentary. His hands were ink-stained, steady now after years of searching, of hesitating between the smile of the mystic and the laughter of the philosopher. He gazed into the page like a seer into a scrying bowl and saw not veils and allegories, but the plain face of a man, Omar himself. Yes, he could see him now. Not robed in the clouds of metaphysical ecstasy, but robed in the evening's warmth. Seated with friends under a trellised sky, a half-empty flask beside him, his lips curled in that sardonic, knowing smile. The look of a man who dared to speak aloud what others only whispered in frightened thought. "It is tempting, of course," the translator went on, turning his eyes to the text, "to make a saint of him. So many do, to soften his laughter into prayer and his drunkenness into devotion. But listen to him." And in the silence, Omar's verses spoke again, wry, tender, sparing nothing. "Ah, make the most of what we yet may spend, before we too into the dust descend. Dust into dust and under dust, to lie without wine, without song, without singer, and without end." The translator lifted his head and continued to reflect on Omar, his eyes dark with memory. There is no veil here, no deliberate mist, just a man wounded by time, drunk on defiance. A philosopher who loved truth more than comfort. A man who mocked piety, not because he feared God, but because he saw how men abused his name. And yes, he drank. That veritable juice of the grape. He let the words settle like sand in the bottom of a glass, then continued, softer now. "They say he used wine as others use incense to rise toward the divine. But why, then, did he joke of washing corpses in it? Why did he speak of shaping clay from dead men's bones to fashion cups to drink from again?" The wind stirred the shutters and the candle flickered. Outside, the constellations of Persia still turned, as they had in Omar's night, as they always would. Because he knew, the translator said, that when men try to touch eternity, they often miss the moment in their hands, and he would not. No, Omar gripped the now with both fists. He saw the world as a fleeting guest house, and so he drank deeply before the host asked him to leave. He gestured to a page where at the top was written, "The Divinity." And yes, Omar drank real wine with real friends. That his ecstasy came not in the cries of dervishes, but in the laughter after a clever jest, the taste of grape on his tongue. So which is it then? The translator did not await an answer. He turned to another leaf. Omar was a freethinker, and his scorn for Sufi pretenses has been noted. And in the Rubaiyat, Omar speaks of the Sufi with disdain. He is said to have been especially hated and dreaded by the Sufis, whose practice he ridiculed. Persian poets, including Hafiz, borrowed largely of Omar's material, but turning it to a mystical use more convenient to themselves and the people they addressed. Omar was too honest of heart as well of head for this. Having failed of finding any providence but destiny, and any world but this, he set about making the most of it. Preferring rather to soothe the soul through the senses into acquiescence with things as he saw them, than to perplex it with vain disquietude after what they might be. His worldly ambition was not exorbitant, and he sometimes took a humorous pleasure in exalting the gratification of sense above that of the intellect, in which he must have taken great delight, although it failed to answer the questions in which he, in common with all men, was most vitally interested. The translator smiled grimly. I do not condemn the Sufi for seeing himself in Omar. It is what all lovers do. We find our own face in the beloved's mirror, but I will not deny Omar the dignity of his unbelief. His voice grew distant, as though speaking more to himself than to any listener. This was not a man cloaked in allegory. No, he comes to us plainly, wittily, mournfully, and as real as flesh, and as bitter as last night's wine. And he leaned forward now, pressing his palm to the paper, as though to summon Omar's presence once more, with others like Hafiz and Attar. The Persian poet is lost in the metaphor, drowned in symbol and flame. But Omar sits beside you at the table. He pours the wine. He winks as he toasts the futility of hope and the beauty of a single breath. Outside, the stars wheeled on, indifferent and radiant, and what shall we say of God? The translator murmured. He looked up once more, eyes weary but firm. Omar believed, perhaps, or he doubted, or he believed and doubted in the same breath as any honest soul must. But he did not veil his meaning. He did not trade clarity for reverence. The translator rose now, slowly, as though rising not from a chair but from a vigil. So let those who wish make of him a saint. I will keep him as he was, a man who drank real wine, sang real songs, and loved truth more than comfort. A man who taught us not to kneel before life, but to embrace it, joke with it, mourn it, and live. And so the final leaf closed, gently, like the settling of dust upon a table long abandoned by guests. In the silence that followed, Omar seemed to rise, not as a spirit, nor as a saint, but as a companion on the long road, flask in hand, smile crooked, eyes deep with the night sky. The burden of Omar's song, if not let us eat, is assuredly let us drink, for tomorrow we die. Ah, fill the cup. What boots it to repeat? How time is slipping underneath our feet. Unborn tomorrow and dead yesterday, why fret about them if today be sweet? And in that echo, both laughter and farewell lingered.